Overhead power line protocols. Equipment with exposures to overhead power lines include aerial lifts, earth-moving equipment like backhoes, trackhoes, and high lifts, cranes, concrete pumpers, long-handled cement finishing tools, metal building materials, metal ladders, raised dump truck beds, and scaffolds. Electrocution. On March 1st, 1990, a 29-year-old worker was electrocuted when he pushed the crane cable on a 1-yard cement bucket into a 7,200-volt power line. The victim was a member of a crew that was constructing the back wall of an underground water holding tank at a sewage treatment plant. Before work on the water tank began, the company safety director made sure that insulated line hoses were placed over sections of the power line near the job site and that a safe clearance zone was marked off for arriving cement trucks to use for loading their cement buckets. After the wall was poured, the driver of the cement truck cleaned the loading chute on his truck with a water hose mounted on the truck. He began to pull away. The crew supervisor yelled at him, asking if the crew could use his water hose to wash out the cement bucket suspended from the crane. The driver stopped the truck under the power line, and the crane operator, not realizing that the truck had been moved, swung the boom to position the bucket behind the truck. The victim grasped the handle of the bucket door and pushed down to open it, bringing the crane cable into contact with the power line. The victim provided a path to ground and was electrocuted. Currently, OSHA regulations require employers to take precautions when cranes and boomed equipment are operated near overhead power lines. Any overhead power line shall be considered energized unless the owner of the line or the electrical utility company indicates that it has been de-energized and is visibly grounded. Employers shall ensure that overhead power lines are de-energized or separated from the equipment and its load by implementing one or more of the following procedures. De-energize and visibly ground electrical distribution and transmission lines. Use independent insulated barriers to prevent physical contact with the power lines. Ensure that automatic re-energizing devices, reclosers, are inoperative. Where it is difficult for an operator to maintain clearance by visual means, a person, a spotter, shall be designated to observe the clearance between the energized power lines and the equipment and its load. Maintain minimum clearance distance from the energized power lines and the equipment or its load. Minimum clearance distances. Maintain 10 feet or more between any part of the equipment and the power lines, and increase the distance by ½ inch for each 1,000 volts over 50,000 volts. If operating a crane or similar equipment within 20 feet of energized power lines, be sure to do the following. If the line cannot be de-energized, the project team must show that it is infeasible to de-energize and ground or relocate the lines. Safe distances must be determined by the owner or operator of the power line or a registered professional engineer who is a qualified person. A planning/discussion meeting must be held between the job site superintendent and a member of the safety team. A dedicated spotter must be assigned with the equipment when moving under or within 20 feet of overhead lines. Warning signs reading "Caution Overhead Power Lines" must be in place to warn of the overhead power line hazard. Non-conductive rigging and tag lines must be used. A range of motion limiting device must be used. Install visual or physical barricades at least 10 feet from the equipment where feasible. Use red paint on the ground, as is done with underground utilities to increase awareness. Mark as OH lines or OH power. Equipment must be properly grounded where applicable, such as working in an electrical substation or while working in a stationary position under or within 10 feet of energized power lines. Workers must be kept from touching anything connected to the equipment, cab, counterweight, load lines, etc. The owner of the power lines and the KCI superintendent must meet to review the line voltage, safe approach distances, and other safety procedures. One person must be identified who will implement the plan and can stop work if necessary. Documentation of the safe work procedures must be immediately available on site and identified on the daily JSA. Other precautions when operating around power lines. Operate the equipment at a slower than normal rate in the vicinity of the lines. Exercise caution near long spans of overhead lines, since wind can cause the power lines to sway laterally and reduce the clearance between the equipment and the power line. Mark safe routes where equipment must repeatedly travel beneath the power lines. Exercise caution when traveling over uneven ground that could cause the equipment to weave or bob into the power lines. Keep all personnel well away from the equipment whenever it is close to the power lines. Prohibit persons from touching the equipment or its load until a signal person has indicated that it is safe to do so. To protect against electrical shock injury, if there is contact between the equipment and the energized line, the equipment operator should remain inside the cab. All other personnel should keep away from the equipment since the ground around the machine might be energized. The operator should try to remove the equipment from contact by moving it in the reverse direction from that which caused the contact. If the equipment cannot be moved away from contact, if the operator is safe, the operator should remain inside the cab until the lines have been de-energized. If the equipment must be unmounted, the operator must carefully jump down, keeping feet together and hopping away from the area. Case number 2, one death. On June 24, 1991, a 37-year-old construction laborer was electrocuted while pulling a wire rope that was attached to a crane cable toward a load. The choker was connected to a steel roof joist that was being lifted 150 feet across the roof of a one-story school and set in place. The cab of the crane was positioned 11 foot 6 inches away from a 7200 volt power line. After a previous roof joist had been set in place, the crane operator swung the crane boom and the cable back towards the victim, who grabbed the choker in his left hand. With his right hand, he held onto a steel rod that had been driven into the ground nearby. At this point, the momentum of the swinging crane apparently caused the crane cable to contact the power line. The electrical current passed across the victim's chest and through the steel rod to the ground, causing his electrocution. If you take nothing else away from this, keep these things in mind. Ground and de-energize lines whenever possible. Cover lines to increase visibility. Remember, this is not insulation. Always treat power lines as if they are energized and maintain a safe distance. Put signs in place to warn of the hazard and paint red markings on the ground that indicate overhead power lines. Use a dedicated spotter whenever it is difficult to maintain the desired clearance by visual means. Look up and live.